Thank you. Always a problem. First of all, I'd like to thank Mia very much for inviting me to this wonderful event and the very, very nice introductions that were made from the Academy. I appreciate it very much. It is certainly for me an honor to be here, and I want you all to know how much I appreciate the opportunity. So let's start my talk. Today is about alignment. This is a concept that I've been investigating now for over 25 years. And my interest in alignment has to do with why we first had so few women in science, and second, because over different trends that we have been involved with and we have looked at, we have found that the number of young people moving into science was not enough, considering how important the issues in science are today. So let's talk just a wee bit about what's going on in the scientific community that really makes these problems exacerbate to a period of extreme importance. And the first, of course, is innovation and how it is affecting our labor markets and our societies. So if we look at all of the technological changes and how they are impacting the world of labor markets, it becomes really increasingly obvious to us that not only is science, engineering, biology important, but they're also important in other fields. If you look at the number of people that are looking at generative kinds of technology in law, the patents in law that have come up for the scientific community. If you look at the kinds of issues that people are facing with respect to planning new communities, that very much affects science. Should we have a river? What can we do about the water? There is practically no area today in terms of changes in technology that is not being affected by science. So my first issue and my first interest has always been that no matter what kind of an interest you have as a young person in high school, that the first and most important thing is we must, as a global society, educate every child in the importance of science literacy. We cannot make the mistake of believing that we can only look at science to be able to recruit scientists. Every person in our world has to be aware of the changes of what is going on in science. So, the second problem that we have, which has really come up most recently, is how unstable the technological world is right now. And if you look at the number of layoffs that happened in the technology within the United States over the past years, and how many young people are looking for jobs who were hired at Google, at Amazon, you begin to realize that we are in a labor market that is extraordinarily unstable. The car industry is a perfect example. We were going to have self-driving cars. Well, we're not having self-driving cars right now. That turned out to be quite a problem. So we see that the kinds of careers that people are going into are not stable careers. No one's going to work in a factory for their whole career. That is no longer going to be an option. Young people are going to have multiple careers over their lifetimes. So what do they need to be able to survive in a society that's built by a huge number of technological changes and about informational work that's making our lives uncertain and questionable? So therefore, what do young people need in terms of how to cope with the future that they're about to face? One thing we believe that's really important is that they get a better understanding of the future of employment and what that's going to look like. That they're going to be in jobs that are not going to be stable, that they're going to have certain kinds of scientific information that they didn't have to have before, and all of these kinds of things become increasingly important. So therefore, our work has always been to think about how can we align educational opportunities with career goals that require complex information, guidance, and navigation. The outline of my talk today is about the concept of alignment. Second, about research on its impact on education completion and labor market success. Third, how we can assist young people in encouraging alignment after secondary school. Then the path we have taken to solve this problem. And then our latest adventures in AI and gaming technology and the promise of generative AI. So let's just start with what is alignment. So, in the beginning of, it was the end of 1999, in 1992, I received a very large grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to look and understand why we did not have more young people going into science. We started to look at lots of information about who was going into science and who thought they were going to go into science but then didn't go into science at all. So in the sociological literature, it was very much all based on expectations, parent expectations. So if your father and mother expected that you were going to follow in their footsteps, or if they saw the labor market as something that young women ought to go into teaching because that was a safe career for them, and then the other thing is the kinds of different careers that men would have. Most of the models for what the impact of having parent expectations were on what kinds of careers young people chose through the 80s and the 90s were very much on the question about how far in school do you plan to get? This question of how far in school do you plan to get? In other words, were you going to finish your education by the time you were out of secondary school? Were you going to go on to post-secondary school to try and become a professional? Were you going to become a doctor, a scientist? All of those kinds of things were expectations that parents had about their children. But the key expectation was, were you going to go to college? In the 1990s, when we looked at this issue across the globe, we found out, particularly in the United States, that over 80% of young people said that they were going to go to college. Now, when you looked at the numbers of kids that actually went to college, that number was very much below the expectation that everybody was going to go to college. So my colleague, David Stevenson, and I started to look much more deeply into this issue about, well, everybody thinks they're going to college. That does not turn out to be a great predictor of whether they go to college. Not only that, but they really don't have a clear understanding about what kind of career and how much education you need for certain kinds of careers, nor do they have any kind of expectation about how much money you're going to earn. We did a major study in the 90s. We went to 33 schools across the United States. We interviewed over 12,000 students. And when we looked at our results, what we found was that social media, and this was in the 90s, was having a tremendous impact on what young people thought they wanted to do. First was everybody thought they were going to go to college. There were all kinds of television programs about young people going to college. And then there were all of these kinds of programs about what you thought a investigator did. I don't know if any of you remember any of these programs that were very popular, but they were all about people that were investigating extraterrestrials on the basis of scientific things that they were finding in the earth. This was a real problem. We had people who wanted to be marine biologists, people that wanted to go into geology to look at fossils to see if they could figure out if these were coming from another planet. So the whole kind of idea of what the workforce looked like, what these jobs were actually about, was really not just a problem of young people that were low income, but because the technology and the world was changing so quickly, even middle-class families were not giving their children really good direction about understanding what kinds of futures they could have for themselves. As a consequence of that, David and I started working on a model of alignment. We received a lot of pressure and a lot of criticism from the standard people in the field because they said expectations was all that mattered. David and I said no. We have to gain an understanding of the careers that young people want to pursue, how much knowledge they have about those careers, and we have to start doing that when they are in secondary school. And therefore, we took, instead of just the expectation from the parent, we looked at the expectation from the child, we looked at the occupational interests they had. Not that we were deciding that you were going to become an accountant when you were in secondary school, but rather, what did you understand more about the world of work and your own strengths and weaknesses? And the two concepts that we felt were really critical here was first, how far in school, yes, did you want to go? And how far in school did that particular measure relate to the kind of work you wanted to do? So remember, it's the idea that if you wanted to go to technical school and you didn't want to go into post-secondary education, but wanted to learn a trade or get particular knowledge related to all kinds of technical colleges and universities that were open, did that match with your strengths, your weaknesses, and your own particular interest? So we built this model. I'm a quantitative statistical person who does mainly work on randomized trials, secondary analysis of large-scale data sets. So we really were looking at the question about, are young people more aware of their abilities, strengths, and skills? And we recognized that they were not going to be aligned if that was not the case. So what needed to be done to be able to help young people get a clearer sense of their futures? So first, we talked about the concept of self-awareness. Now, if you look at the literature in psychology, there's a very famous person by the name of Bandura, and he was very clear about the importance of self-reflection on who I am and what I am. So it was really helpful, especially for adolescents, to think about, what am I good at? And if I want to be a scientist, do I like science? Or do I really just want to go and do investigative reporting? The mismatch between whether or not you took science courses in high school that were advanced level courses, or whether or not you just sort of were dreaming about the careers that you had seen on television. And yet you never took any of those courses. You didn't have any mathematical skills. Then you were just totally misaligned about thinking about the world that you were about to inherit. So that was our first problem. The second problem, and this came up yesterday when someone was talking about visualization, and that is, could you imagine what that work really looked like? Did you have a clear understanding of what it was that young people were starting off in their careers, what kind of careers looked like, what kind of the work looked like, and if you had the skills to be able to do that? And then the next part that was key to all of this was, could you build a strategic plan? And this is really very important for people, and we heard a little bit about this in secondary school, especially because if you were going to go to college, that the dropout rates in college were just way too high, especially in our technical and our two-year institutions. Because here is where people were moving into these kinds of institutions and they didn't have the skills. And they didn't have the right courses that they were taking in high school. They were unclear about the kinds of work that they wanted to do. So it was imperative that at the secondary school level, especially for young people that did want to go into science but were struggling, then they needed to be able to take more courses that were advanced in science, but they needed extra help to be able to do that. And extra help was something that high schools could do. We could have special programs, we could have different kinds of things they could do outside of school. This is also the time in the early and late 1990s and beginning of 2000 that we started to think about things like robotics and robotics clubs. It wasn't just science fairs anymore, but we were doing a much more comprehensive understanding of different kinds of activities that we could bring students into work on science. Additionally, large grants were made to universities and to science centers that could function independently of the high school, so that young people had an opportunity to go and explore things in universities, museums, places that they were doing scientific experiments. We had many more programs that came about in the 2000 that brought young high school students to colleges and started to show them the kinds of opportunities that they could have. So we found that when you had this kind of alignment, that you were therefore much more likely to move into tertiary education. So we felt our theoretical model was this, and we decided that we would really spend a lot of time trying to measure, were we right? Were we right about the idea if young people were actually aligned, could they really have a better chance at finishing their education and moving into a career? Now, we were funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. These are the people that made millions of dollars with Oldsmobile cars and also different kinds of technology that was related to General Motors. This is what really built this whole thing. So they were very interested in trying to get a different look on why careers happen the way that they did. We then built this very large study in the 90s to be able to figure all of this out. And we looked at alignment in how it was we started actually in the middle school. So we were looking at 6th graders and 8th graders in middle schools around the country, and then we were looking at young people in high schools, and we were trying to be really clear on whether or not this idea of alignment made sense. Should our high schools, should our colleges be making a stronger effort to try and bring together the world of work and young people's aspirations and the skill sets that they had? So we then took all of this information, and for any of you that one day might want to see all of this, it is in tons of lockers in a non-used gym at Michigan State University. Because of the fact, not only did we survey these students, we went and we visited them in their classrooms. We talked to their teachers. We interviewed their parents. We interviewed them. We also did what I talked about yesterday, something called the experience sampling method. This is something that was developed by a social psychologist, and we wanted to find out more about how young people felt about the classes that they were in when they were in high school. And what we found, which was really tragic, and found in every kind of PISA study and TIMS study and any other kind of study that was being conducted globally, is that if you went into science classes were still being taught pretty much by textbooks. There was very little experimentation, and the experimentation that was taught was all in movies. It wasn't even so much that they were using videos. They would use these old movies, and they would show different kinds of things that were going on. The work of science was in the 50s in 2000 in high schools. That was really a major problem. The only place that there was major movement were in the advanced level science classes. That would be in the physics classes and in the chemistry classes, but even in the chemistry classes, the kids told us that they were bored. There was just way too much time spent on memorizing different things from the periodic table, and the students that were in physics were very small. The proportion of students across the United States, the proportion of students in other countries that were actually in physics was very small. Now, the physics programs, some of them were really very strong, but the majority of them, again, they were not doing enough science. This problem, I went to the National Academies of Sciences, I talked about it, I showed the data that we had on this, and there was a movement, a very strong movement, that started in 2000 about trying to raise awareness in the community. And Joe will talk about this because these panels started to be put together in 2000 about how we need to reform 2000. Okay, when basically, how do we reform science education and move away from this very old kind of way of teaching science? And that's how we basically brought in all of these panels from the National Research Council, the National Academies of Science, and the AAAS, of which I currently, the advancement of science, started to really say, we've got to make a major difference in how we're thinking about science. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened. When we started to look at this alignment, we found that misalignment was the strongest among low-income and minority students, that they were the ones that were the least. Immigrant populations in different countries who did not speak the language, they were the most misaligned. And the misalignment was that they were basically, underaligned what they wanted to think about. So that meant that if I think I'm going to be a doctor, I think I'll go to community college. Well, the pathway to becoming a doctor is not to go from high school into a two-year college, no, that isn't going to work. And similarly, there were other paths that were very much like that. Then there's something that was called you were over-aligned. You thought too much about the kind of job or work that you wanted to do, and you wanted to have multiple majors. I can tell you right now that the over-alignment model is very prominent today in colleges, and it's really started to become a huge problem, which is basically that kids are staying in school for 5 years and colleges because they're trying to take and be experts in more than one. And typically in the sciences, they basically take the science work and combine it with something else. The only problem with the science work, at least in many of the state colleges across the United States, is that you have to start that when you are a freshman. That the trajectory for being able to move into environmental science, to be able to move into science, to be able to move into mathematics, they start you off as soon as you get into college. So if you have a kind of aha moment, I want to become a scientist in your sophomore or your junior year, you have to start at the beginning, which is a lot of what the kids are doing. You're getting a lot of students that are 5-year, they're getting enormous amounts of debt, and they're staying in school to try and have these degrees, and then they're entering the labor market where lots of times they're not even work for them. So we started giving that problem. We wanted to know what can we do to improve it. And so how can you optimize skills? How can you access more and better information? And how do you visualize your college careers? So these were the kinds of things that we saw were really problematic, and then the idea was, well, what could we do about them? So one thing is that it has to be evidence-based. Evidence-based is what I do. I cannot think about innovating a program that will change young people's lives unless it's evidence-based. The first thing that I thought about and I worked on as an intervention, I thought that if we went into the high schools and we basically did a major effort on trying to help young people learn more about careers, give better guidance about what to do with their lives, gave them support, gave them all kinds of ways to learn more about their own strengths and weaknesses, what kinds of courses they should be taking. And so I did that. My speech when I was the president of the American Education Research Association basically was about this program. The problem with this program was it was very labor intensive, and I got the same kind of results that other people got with much cheaper, lower labor market costs. So I was very disappointed. It's not that I didn't help students and that more students didn't go to college, they did, but not enough of them to say, aha, this is a great solution to the problem. Actually, the ideas were picked up a lot by high schools all over the United States, and they did all kinds of things, just not the whole program. And the whole program was, a very big package, including, helping the teachers learn how to talk about careers as part of what they did in their classrooms, regardless of whether they were teaching English or they were teaching social studies or science, and talk about what people were doing in these careers. The second thing that happened is that I was at the University of Chicago at the time. I did a lot of work with the medical community. The medical community loved this idea. Why? Because they did not have enough people going into clinical research in science. And they needed more people to deal with questions about viruses and questions about immunology and all of the things that physicians and clinical people in laboratories were worried about. They liked the model that we had presented, the kinds of things that they thought were going to make a huge difference in the training of medical researchers, and we're talking about bench scientists too. And I hooked up with my colleagues in the medical school, and they developed a model called Teach Research. Teach Research was funded by the National Institute of Health, and it's still going on in different forms. And they're still doing this kind of work to try and influence more young people to do actual bench science work. And when we look at what happened with COVID and with our understanding of viruses, we really need more of this kind of work and training. And I'm very excited that basically the Teach Research model has gone forward. The second kind of work that we continue to do and did a lot of work is that we started doing work on secondary data analysis to look at what kinds of things were happening to young people in the world of work. So our models of alignment make a difference in terms of whether people went into the right careers and if they had labor market success. And what we found is, yes, it did. It had real labor market success. And not only did we find it in models that we developed now, and I'm going to show you some of this just in a little bit on our references, but it also was true in the UK with the British longitudinal studies, and in other countries that started to look at these issues of alignment and what the implications were if you were better aligned, if you had a more realistic understanding about the world of work, if you started to get a better sense of your own strengths and weaknesses, and all of these kinds of things were leading to more successful people in the labor market, more successful people that were entering science and staying in science and doing the work in science. So, where are we now? Well, because of the fact that I felt that what I did with CAP, the College Ambition Program, was good, but it wasn't great. What could I do differently? And I started to do work on badges. So in 2017, I was looking at, badges were very important. I thought if I could incentivize students with badges, I would do much better in basically getting them to get a better understanding of the world of work, the world of science, and how to go forward. That didn't turn out the way I had hoped, and I realized, they're using their phones all the time. They're constantly on their phones. How about if I could invent a game, and the game basically on your phone would help with your alignment, and it would show you different kinds of careers, and you could do really well with that. And then kids would, if you're riding the bus and you're, kind of bored of what you're doing at home, if you had a game you could play. Now, it wasn't as great as Fortnite, but if you could have a game that could play, that you could actually learn about careers from, and you enjoyed it, and it was something worthwhile, how would that deal with this problem? Or not that that was the one way to solve the problem for everything, but it certainly would help students, especially low-income and minority students who didn't have a social support network. Because a social support network is really the thing that makes such a big difference. If you could have people that had those jobs, relatives that knew people to give you an opportunity to move into networks that you didn't have, then you would have a much better understanding of the world of work. So I went and I started working on developing a game. And I have to tell you, I've been working now on developing this game for 8 years. It's very difficult, very, very difficult. Why? Because I'm not a gamer, and the best gamers are young people that are a lot younger than I am. So I surround myself with a lot of young people who like to do games, and I find people in the colleges and in the programs and in the new programs that are basically gamers to try and help. And we have made some progress, and let me show you what it looks like now. So essentially, you get a login. The login basically asks you a question about, what do you want to do when you are 30? And we have like the back end of it that's in the back end. They don't see it all, but we have enough jobs, like we have over 400 jobs that you could possibly have. We update it every year with ONET, which talks about every kind of job that's available in the United States, and also how much education you need for that job and how much money you can earn. So basically, if you look at this, a lot of these things are just coming on, computer programmers, software engineer, all of these things. So because we're always funded in the sciences and because we're very interested in this problem about making sure that we have enough scientists to move us forward, this is where we direct all of our attention. So then you get points for your education, and you get points for your earnings, and then if all these things match up, you get 2 points, and then you're, of course, looked at to be aligned. So then what happens if you're misaligned? And so this will tell you about what happened because of the fact that the kind of job you thought about didn't match up with how much you wanted to go to school or how much that you were going to earn. So essentially, this is where we were. I gave a presentation on this, and then I presented it, and there was someone who was the vice president of Roblox. I don't know if you are familiar with Roblox, but Roblox is about $1 billion company. He came to me and he said, Barbara, this is really interesting work. I've never seen a game that is really designed to teach the kids something they don't know, and but they're not going to have enough fun with this. This is a game that is a lot of fun with, and so therefore I'm going to introduce you to my engineer that can help you. Well, unfortunately, part of that problem was that there was a lot of carryover from COVID, and the people that large corporations to invest millions of dollars in a new game, they want huge samples. Like, he wasn't interested in me unless I could get 10,000 students in several high school districts to be able to play the game. And the gamer that he thought was the best lived in Australia. I just thought this, I appreciate the fact that my friend Jack was trying to help me. The bottom line is I thought this is not going anywhere. I've really got to go back to the kids, go back to the kinds of things that are much more on the experimental side, because this is just really not going to work. So one of the things that I thought I might be able to encourage more people to want to be part of what we're doing is if I could, first of all, operate with a visual representation. So these are the new visual glasses that you can put on that are connected to your phones, and the new ones are really very cool because they're very small. And then you can come in and you could start to actually see the job. You could put yourself in the opportunity. You could see yourself working in that. You get an emoji of yourself. You can come in, or we could think about a very different kind of way of doing it. So we're in the process right now, one of trying to work with a whole new set of game developers on what are the newest kinds of ways that we can move forward on the game. The second thing that we decided that we really needed to do was to get better data on our game. Meaning, yeah, we did well, and we've got 3 major publications in the new kinds of technology journals that are out there about what we're doing. But I was nervous about it because I thought, well, given that the labor market is so unstable, that there are going to be new technology jobs. So for example, coding's disappearing because you're going to be able to enter in, a whole series of a script, and the computer will code for you. So that, there were all these coding things for people that didn't have jobs and we saw them in Detroit, and we thought, oh my God, this is not going to work. These people are spending a fortune to learn how to be a coder. No one's going to go in, and there's too much of this doing things by hand that now the machines basically are doing it for you. So we started to experiment a little bit with AI. And we were very successful with what we did. And this is the model. Our first model was a decision tree. And this one was just a basic AI kind of teach the machine, figure out how, simulate your data, and then how many more kids would you expect to find jobs if they were aligned. So we did really well with this. The model that I'm working on right now is to try and figure out, can generative AI create for me a new job? And then what kinds of skill sets will people need for new jobs? And I think that this is really kind of very futuristic and something that could be very helpful, because we really need something about what kinds of things can happen in the future. I went to a session at the American Advancement for Science, and there were 4 panels on generative AI in the whole program, and they were packed. And one of the things that a material scientist talked about was how he was using generative AI to create new materials. Like, if you wanted to make a supercomputer, how could you do that, and what were you missing to be able to get the kinds of materials that you would need for that, for supercomputing? And this is exactly what we're trying to figure out. What are the kinds of jobs that are likely to happen in the future, and what kind of information young people are going to need about those jobs if we start to look at it in the future? So these are basically my summary remarks, is that alignment, one scientific statistical issue that always nags at me is that I've not tested alignment with an RCT, but it's working with all the kinds of things that we generally use. So, but I still wish I could do something more with that. I still think that this problem of alignment is still really very difficult and very problematic. The numbers of kids that are not completing college, the numbers of kids that are dropping out, the numbers of kids that are changing their major, we're not keeping their interest, their motivation, why they should stay in the kinds of fields that they're in. And we're just not doing this. And I think that I just have to keep working on this problem, because it's just not coming out the way that I had hoped. And then finally, I believe that alignment really helps and does shape careers and futures, and helps kids. And kids find out, everything that they don't know, especially because our networks are so closed. There's so few opportunities for people that are low income and minority and immigrants and populations to understand what your opportunity structures can be. So that's the biggest issue. And then what I did here, and I'm going to just quickly run through these 2 pages very quickly, is basically to tell you, I've been doing this since the late 90s, and you can look at this list and you'll see how, this is page 1, and this is page 2 of my CV, all of the things that we have done related to alignment. Now, I have to tell you, it's not the same as if you develop a curriculum, and it's not the same as if you develop hierarchical linear modeling. This is a concept. And as a concept, what kind of citations and interests can you build with this? And I'm very proud of what we've been able to do, how we've been able to bring alignment and questions of alignment to other places, and that have picked this up and recognize how important it is to help young people visualize who they could be in roles that they could have, and they could earn money and basically start out in an education pathway that's going to make a lot of sense. So my final slide is the slide that just talks a little bit about all of the wonderful students that have been helping me along the way in my path towards trying to get this game together. And I'm so appreciative of all of them. And this just tells you about the kinds of work that they're doing. So Michael Broda, he now is, one of these people that's doing generative AI. That's what he does, and it's really amazingly exciting. And Ryan Goodwin, who is now a chief of staff and working at Central Florida University and helping the provost figure out how can they help undergraduates reach better alignment. Then Lindsay Young was probably the most promising graduate student I ever had. She helped me design the very first game we ever developed. And then she came to me after her first year, after we had this very rudimentary successful game, and said, "Barbara, I really love you and I love working here, but I love being a doctor more. I'm leaving the field." And so, what do you say? And by the way, she's now waiting to hear, because she's going to be a cardiac surgeon, and she's waiting to hear what her match is and where she's going to get that opportunity. So I continue to try. I've got Lydia Bradford, who is a measurement and quantitative person in our program and loves games. Her roommate, Kayla Barretts, is a gamer, and she can't wait to figure out how we're going to put this together. Catherine Ward is in T&E, but teacher education. She's very interested in being able to understand, can we do this because she's cares about too, how can we help young people move into science careers. And Claire is an undergraduate, because my teams are postdocs to undergraduates, and she's a gamer, and she's helping to work on the game. And we just hired a master's student from computer science who's a gamer, and she's coming, hopefully, to help us. So hopefully we'll have a better game. I'm not giving up yet. It's I have turned it over to the next generation, and I'm hoping that the next time I go and have an interview with somebody like Roblox or someone else that might be willing to give me more money, that we'll be able to have something that will be evidence-based and for today, and be able to work and make things, and young people especially, have a clear understanding. And I think that we can ignite the passion. Those of you here that have in science, I have a passion, and my dear colleague Joe has a passion. My passion is to help young people understand the world that they live in, and to make sure that the world that they're going to inherit is a better world than the one we're in. I cannot think of another thing that would be more important to our world today, to make sure that everybody is more scientific literate. We are never going to help with the questions of environmental science if people do not understand how we are making terrible mistakes with our planet. We have to learn how to communicate, work with each other, and we have to spark passion and interest in discovery and inquiry, or otherwise, I just don't know where we're going. And I know all of you have a passion about something that you're doing because you wouldn't be here. It's a struggle, it's a challenge. And if you can feel that passion, you can bring that passion to young people, and we can really start to make some major changes in how and who we are educating, and hopefully change our world so we have more people that are scientific literate, and questions about evolution and all of that, and people destroying the books and what we're doing in Florida in our education system will stop, and that we can continue in every country to be able to collaborate and work together and do work that's going to move our scientific world into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. It was exactly what we were waiting for on your side.
Thank you.
Very much focusing to the core of the SciCar project. So we have 50 minutes time to raise questions, please. Yes, it's a video.
Well, okay. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Schneider from the Estonian Academy of Science. Thank you very much indeed for this excellent talk and explanation, what are the difficulties and all that sort of things. I was myself related to science education several years ago, well, many years ago, actually through ALEA. ALEA is the acronym All European Academies, which is the Association of the European Academies of Sciences and Humanities. And we organized several conferences on science education, also taking part in the European Science Open Fora, for example, and all that. And this is quite clear that one should start not in the university, but much earlier. And I was a little bit surprised that you haven't mentioned in your talk the main driving force in research and science, and this is curiosity. And my question is now that is now under all these sort of complicated system, is curiosity in research out of date? Thank you.
And that is a great question, and thank you so much. The problem that we have with curiosity is, and I've been working on this concept of curiosity and interest. I didn't want to go into that. This is another area that I have been doing a lot of work in. So when we have explored curiosity, you can be curious about a lot of things. You can be curious about just, oh, what's in the cupboard, or this or that. I am interested in trying to get your focus on interest. I think that we have to build the interest in problem solving. So for me, the question is being able to think about a problem that you don't know the answer to, but basically you can solve it. I want to have it have more formation around its qualities of what you're going to be curious about. And if we just take curiosity in the plain sense of the word, this is very much to the talk I gave yesterday, and some other things that I didn't talk about, is how I've been exploring challenge as key as a way to bring people's interest in, specifically into science, and to engage them in science. Because my issue here is if we use something just like curiosity, that we're not getting them into the science part of inquiry, into the opportunity of trying to think about a problem that they don't have the answer to, but that they're willing and determined to try and figure it out. Because if the figuring out process isn't part of it, then it's just curiosity. Well, I'm curious. I've had this argument, and I've had this argument with my Chinese colleague who has been looking at curiosity, and we've been looking at the differences between were you curious or were you interested, and then how, if you were one of the other, how did that make you go on into basically solving and figuring out a problem. So far, I'm winning the argument. I have no clue whether I'm going to win that argument in the future, but I wanted, at least for the first thing that we published in the International Psychology Journal in 2022.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I actually have two questions, if it's okay. The first one is maybe a more introductory question about the concept of alignment. Do you think it's a product, outcome of something, or it's a process actually? So, and I explain it more in this sense that I think most of us in the field of science education know about inquiry. And in case of inquiry processes, as a process, we know that guided inquiry is much more successful than unguided inquiry. And I thought that maybe the same concept could be used in case of alignment as well, in your case. So that this is one, and then maybe you have a comment on that. And the other one is, in my understanding, much more important, so that the question is, what should be aligned? In your presentation, I saw mainly that the career we anticipate for us in the future, and what it will be in the future. But my question is there that actually it might end up in this situation that at one point we have only people in some field of studies. Like in my time when we graduated in high school, most of the people wanted to study economics. Of course, maybe, I don't know this data right now, but okay. But I thought that actually we as a humankind, we as a society should have some imaginaries about the future, thinking of Yazanov's framework of socio-technical imaginaries actually, so that, and it is very difficult to anticipate the future. So that now students often think that I might be an influencer or YouTuber as a job for the future, but maybe it's not existent in 5 years, I don't know. They also do not know. And in your presentation, you very much linked the future career with the salary. So many students nowadays don't think about salary, but about their purpose in life, curiosity, and so on. So that's also another topic, so that maybe we should think how do you align the future careers with the needs of the humankind as a society.
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I think that that was a great question. For the first, it's process. And we try, I focus this very much on science, but we try to expand it and show lots of different things. And we do not try and pigeonhole people into a particular career now. The idea is instead, and that's why in the very first slide I showed you, is self-awareness, visualization, and mobilize resources. So in other words, you can say, I have a passion about science, I loved it, I love doing robotics, but then you could find out by the time you're ready to go to college, well, maybe that wasn't so much what I wanted to do. I want to be a poet. And even though the world doesn't like poets, maybe I need to be going into something else like literature. The one thing we have not done, and I felt that you raised, which is the question about what do we need as a society. And that's another reason that we have been looking so hard at these ONET kinds of things about what are the kinds of work that people can do. And I think that certainly, and I have not put into this the moral imperative of the world that we are supposed to have in the future. And I haven't thought about that, but I'm really extraordinarily appreciative of what you said, because in the gaming world, that's an implicit message I haven't thought about inserting in the game. And I think that that's a brilliant idea, that we should basically think about that in the context of the kind of work you're doing, how that will help society. So I greatly appreciate your comment. I think it was exactly right on point. And I'm going to go back into my computer and I'm going to write my students and I'm going to say we missed this. And we desperately need this, because I told them I would not do a shoot 'em up game. That was the first thing that I said. I will not do something where basically you get points for killing your enemy. That's not what I'm about. It can't be that. But I don't think we paid enough attention to how the bridge will, if you built the bridge, strengthens the opportunity for these people to get from one place to another, or how this kind of material could make so that if there was an earthquake or a hurricane, that your building wouldn't fall apart. What's the kind of technical system we have to notify people when a volcano is going to erupt? So you're absolutely right. And I have to think about that a lot more to make sure that the gamers have an understanding of the outcome, which basically will help humanity. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you for lecture. My question is quite short. Which are the preconditions for youngsters to enter the process of alignment? Do they need to learn something before, or can they just enter without anything, or or are there some age limits or age
Thank you.
conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I'll just tell you what we've learned, and what we've learned is that very young children, so these would be 6, 7, and especially ones that are less mature, they still think about, I want to be Batman or Spider-Man, or I'm going to do all these different things. I mean, the knowledge base of, I'm going to be a mom, I'm going to have children, or I'm going to do this or that. The career formation process seems to occur, the parent starts telling them, oh, you should be a doctor by the time they're 4. I mean, lots of parents, especially middle-class parents, have this tremendous pressure, at least in the United States, to start talking to their kids about what their strengths are and thinking about how wonderful they're going to be and whether or not they're going to play soccer and be a soccer player. But that for the child themselves, for the developmental work that goes on in terms of exploration and looking at different kinds of careers, it really starts in middle school. It starts kind of, in 5th grade, so that would be, 11, by 11, because we tried to do this with younger children. It did turn out as well, but if we started in 6th grade and kind of started working with 11, 12-year-olds, they had enough exposure to television, to their parents, and places to start thinking about, what will I think about when I want to be there? The kind of information that all young children need. Children certainly need to be literate, they certainly need to be able to do mathematics, and they certainly have to know a lot about the world that they live in and the kinds of problems that we're facing. There is no question about any of those things. The kids that in high school, they absolutely need a much stronger base of science information. I am begging everyone that it has to be reading, mathematics, and science. And if we don't make science, because science is also social science. I'm a social scientist. Science has got to be our third. If science is not our third, I have no idea where this world is going. So if you were to ask me what do kids need to know more science. And I am trying with that all the time. Earth science, geology, yes, they've been substituting all kinds of courses for science, and they really need the full strong science sequence. There's no question about it. It's the reason I'm partners with Joe. I know I can see what's missing in our society and how misinformation is just proliferating everywhere, and we're really facing really very difficult decisions. How can the people in California decide that there's not going to be any information on evolution? We can't let this happen. So we've got to have a much stronger science. Science is the crux of whether or not this planet's going to survive. And that's from my perspective, but I feel I'm very dedicated to this question. And I think that this basic need has to be, these are the skills. Now let's talk about the kind of work you could do with these skills. I'm not training people to be accountants or lawyers. The idea is to train them to know who they are, what they like, what they're curious about, and basically to build that for their future.
One question, yeah. This is the last question, and then we go to the next speaker. So.
Yes, thank you very much, Marju Öpik, Institute of Ecology and Earth Sciences. What is nagging in my head is that when I'm teaching university students, then half of the class might not know who they want to become. So essentially, people's minds are lazy, so making a strategy for your life might be energy consuming, whilst just seeing how it goes and trying different things might be less energy consuming. So how to get such people on board? And you were talking very nicely about things that you need science awareness, you need ability to make difference between evidence-based decisions and maybe gut feeling-based decisions, and they might make difference in your life. So how to address this aspect?
Yeah.
2-minute answer.
Okay, that's an excellent question, and I'm very happy that my colleague is going to be talking in a little while, because the most important thing that we build in our engagement models are meaningful questions. So the way that we can bring interest into that other part of the population is by asking a question that is meaningful to the student. Why is it that we don't get the same kind of electricity into our homes that other people have? Why are our lands flooding and we can no longer grow cotton when we used to grow cotton all the time? Why is it that we have to have all these drills on hurricanes? It's got to be something that's affecting their lives. It has to be something that's meaningful to them. Otherwise, they're not going to pay attention, and you're going to lose them just like you say you are. Because if we're never going to go anywhere without having that deep feeling that it's really important, that it is personally meaningful to them. And that means basically understanding that what's personally meaningful for me may not be personally meaningful to an Inuit who is basically living in Alaska. So we have got to think about, as teachers, when we start to do our work, to think about our students and the cultural resources that they bring to us, and to use those cultural resources to try and help them figure out questions to solve that are meaningful and of interest to them. So I thank you all for everything and your great questions, and I appreciate everything that you've asked, and I'm curious to talk to you more. So thanks very much, and I thank you again.
Thank you.